Hi friends, welcome to QApedia and this is our blog qapedia.com. Today the topic that we are going to discuss is requirements traceability metrics, and the subtopics that we will discuss today are what is RTM, what is requirement traceability metrics, why RTM was introduced, importance of RTM, how does RTM look like, format of RTM, example of RTM, how does RTM help, summary of the session, and then question for the session. So let's start. Requirement traceability matrix. Requirement traceability matrix is also called RTM in short form. The first topic we have is what is RTM? What is requirement traceability matrix? So RTM is made up of four words: requirements, trace, ability, matrix. So it is a matrix or a document. Matrix or document is same thing. So it is a matrix or document where we should be able to trace each and every requirement. Okay, so if you read this particular sentence statement and you see this particular uh, statement, then it looks like same. We are covering requirement, then we are talking about ability, then we are talking about tracing, and then we are talking about document. Okay, so requirement traceability matrix is a matrix or document where we should be able to trace each and every requirement. That's what we have written here. Now the question is, how do we trace each and every requirement? So what do we do? All the test cases and test scenarios that we write for a particular project, then we will map those test cases. All those test cases and test scenario, we will map it to the related requirement in this document, and that is how we trace each and every requirement. So it's a document where test scenario, test cases and requirements are linked or mapped to each other. In this document, test cases, test scenario and requirement will be linked or mapped to each other. Now when we write test cases, how do we write? We will divide the requirement into different test scenarios and test cases, right? Like there is one requirement number one. For this we have written one scenario, test scenario 1. For this particular scenario we will write some test cases 1, test case 2. Same way for requirement 2 we have written a test scenario 2. Now for this test scenario 2 we will write some test case like test case 3, test case 4. So this way we divide each requirement into different test scenarios and then different test cases. That's what we do. And then these particular test cases will be mapped to the requirement in the RTM, requirement traceability matrix document. Why RTM was introduced, or importance of RTM. Now, whenever we plan a project, then it's very important that each and every requirement is developed and tested so that we don't miss any requirement. And so we make sure that we create test case for each and every requirement and then execute them. Okay. Our main agenda is at the end to deliver the quality product to the end user. So we should be delivering a quality product to end user, or we can say we should deliver a defect-free product to the end user. If we make sure that we have created test cases for each and every requirement, and then we have executed the test case and we have found them passed, then we can say that we have delivered a quality product or a defect-free product to the end user. The biggest question that always comes to mind, that how do we make sure that each and every requirement has been tested? And the answer to that is requirements traceability matrix, and that is the importance of RTM. That's why RTM was introduced. Okay, how does RTM look like, or format of RTM? So it is basically a spreadsheet which has following columns like requirement ID, requirement description, test scenario, test cases, test status and defect. So this is how a typical RTM look like. This is the main format of RTM, where we have requirement ID, requirement description, test scenario, test cases, test status and defect. If any test cases fail, then for that defect number will come here. Example of RTM. So let's take an example of a project where we have to do software testing for an e-commerce website. So we will have some requirement in that project, and then what we will do, we will create some test scenarios and test cases for those requirements. Now if we want to make sure that we have covered all the requirement, then we have to trace the requirements in RTM. In requirement traceability matrix document, we have to trace all the requirements. So we will create an RTM, and that RTM will look like this. We have already seen the format of RTM, where we have column requirement ID, requirement description, test scenario, test cases, then test status and defect. Now let's see what is the first requirement. The first requirement is related to create account or register functionality. So for this we have written a scenario that tests the create account functionality with email ID and mobile number. So we have written some test cases. First test case is test the create account functionality with email ID, and then if we see the test status, it is passed. Then a second test case we have written test the create account functionality with mobile number, and this is failed, and there is some defect number which we have raised and we have copied it here. So you see there is a requirement, we have written a scenario, then we have written test cases, and then we are mapping the status of that, and then if any defect is there, we are matching it here, and each and every test case is mapped or linked with the requirement. So this way we make sure that for this particular requirement all the test cases have been written and those are mapped as well to that particular requirement. Let's see another scenario. Another requirement is for login functionality. So we have written a scenario for that. Test login functionality for valid and invalid credentials. So there is one test case. Test login functionality for valid username, valid password. Test login functionality for valid username, invalid password. Test login functionality for invalid username and valid password. Test login functionality for invalid username and invalid password. So we have written 4 test cases. Okay. The first one is pass, second one is pass, third one is pass, fourth one is fail. So we have written a defect number as well. So all these 4 test cases are mapped or linked with the login functionality or login requirement. So you can see this document will help us a lot in mapping the requirement. How does RTM help? How is it helpful for us? So we make sure that we have written test scenarios and test cases for each and every requirement in RTM. So RTM will help us in 100% coverage. Now if any defect comes, then we can find out that which area is being affected because of a defect, which particular functionality has been affected, and then we can test those test cases which belong to that functionality, and we don't need to test all the test cases. So this thing will save our time, okay, for regression testing and all. Then we can identify that the majority of defects have come from which area, and we can make sure that which functionality gives us more defect. Generally 80-20 principle works here. 80% defect will come from 20% functionality. So this is the help. This is how RTM help us in our software testing process. Then summary of the session. We have discussed below topics today. What is RTM? Importance of RTM, format of RTM, example of RTM, and how does RTM help. And now the question for the session is, what is the purpose of a requirement traceability matrix in software development and how is it used to measure project success? Okay, so that's it for the session, guys. And if you want to get the notes for this session, then you can go to this complete blog and get the notes. And that's it for the session. Thank you very much.